Now, today marks 100 years since the Hull airship disaster, which killed 44 of the ship's crew. On the 24th of August 1921, airship R-38 exploded and crashed into the River Humber in front of thousands of onlookers. At the weekend, there was a memorial at Hull Minster to mark the occasion. What happened on that day is the basis of the Airship Trilogy, which is written by American author David Dennington. And I'm delighted that he joins us now. Good afternoon, David.
Good afternoon. How are you today?
I'm grand, and it's lovely to talk to you. So tell us about this. What's the Airshipmen trilogy then?
I'd originally written The Airshipmen, which was a very big book. I made it into 3 books and added lots of photographs, which made it more readable and more handy to read. And it's all about the whole of the British airship program from 1920 through 1930, culminating with the death of the great R101 tragedy. It begins with the R-38, which was the ship being built in Cardington for the US Navy. It was under contract, and the deal was that a whole contingent of Americans would come into England to be trained and to watch the airship built. And it was finally built and then flown to Howden. It did have some problems with steering problems and stuff like that, and they were testing it. And finally, they went out over the North Sea and then came back over the Holderness Plain and made their way towards Hull. Around 5 o'clock, as you can imagine, the city dwellers of Hull were coming out of their offices and factories, and they look up and they see the airship coming out over the city. I think it's Alexander Docks, and then made its way out over the estuary, where it made a sharp turn back towards the city. And thousands of people had gathered in the streets and along the dock in Victoria Pier, and a great crack appeared in the side of the airship, and then some great explosions went off, and it broke in 2.
Goodness.
And the front half of the ship was on fire and went speeding towards Victoria Pier, where it crashed in the water, and the rear half of the airship gently floated down and settled on a sandbar in the middle of the estuary.
Goodness. And how did you go about researching this? Because obviously it happened 100 years ago, so witness statements and everything, I suppose a huge amount of research had to happen.
Yeah, there was quite a bit written. There was a wonderful book called Icarus Over the Humber. Nevil Shute was one of the great authors, who became one of the great authors. He was he joined Barnes Wallis and was building the R100 at Howden. So he'd written quite a bit of it later on, and their lives were affected by R-38 because they didn't want to repeat the same mistakes. And the mistakes were, don't rush the testing, and get it right, get it built right. And weather was another terrible thing. So the Americans were rushing or were putting pressure on the British, and the British wanted to conclude the sale. The Americans wanted to get away across the Atlantic before the bad weather came up after August, as it always does. And so everything was a rush. And they said, we must never let this happen again, which of course, that's exactly what did happen again.
Well, yes, I was going to say it really did. I mean, the test you were talking about, the test actually cost the lives of 28 British airshipmen as well as 16 American ones. And then it happened again, even though they said, the usual, we have to learn lessons from this. Tell us about then what happened after.
Well, they built the 2 ships. One was built by Vickers, and the other ship was built by the Royal Airship Works at Cardington. And it was almost like a competition. One of the great characters was Lord Thompson of Cardington, and he was putting great pressure on them. His favorite ship, of course, was the R101, and he was interested in impressing a Romanian princess, and he wanted to be on that ship when it made its voyage to India. The Vickers ship with Nevil Shute on board was to fly to Canada, and it did. They flew across the Atlantic, down the St. Lawrence, all the way to Montreal. It was an incredible thing. And they made it back. But it had some very scary moments, which I've written about in the books.
And do you think General Lord Thompson was actually pretty kind of involved in kind of improving the safety aspect of them?
Well, safety first and safety second was his watchword. But when it got down to the end, he had his schedule. He wanted to be on that ship to India in October and fly back and impress everybody. It was partly because they wanted to sell airships too, let's face it. And he also wanted to impress his girlfriend.
Oh, well.
He was madly in love with.
Well, you know, people do crazy things to impress. But tell me, why did you want to write about this?
Well, I read it when I was about 18 years old, and read all of Nevil Shute's books. He inspired me because he was an engineer at Howden, and he became one of the world's greatest authors. They made many of his books into movies. So I carried all that with me for years, wanting to be a writer. And I went to the Brixton School of Building in London, and eventually went off to the Bahamas and Bermuda and places like that, doing construction, and still studying this whole subject. And I studied the airship building business for 20 years probably, and then spent 5 years writing the books. I don't know if that really answers the question.
It does. No, it does. But I'm excited to see that your books are actually being turned into audiobooks, because I used to not really be quite a fan of audiobooks, but I've really got into them recently because I love listening to them when I'm doing something else, like something monotonous. It's wonderful to be able to listen to a magnificent story without actually sitting and, reading the book and finding time to do it. But what's lovely about this is that the narrator is known to you, isn't she?
Yes, the narrator is my daughter. I spent a lot of time in California. I was an inspiring actress. She's a trained actress, and she's just finished chapter 1 of the FIRSHIPMEN trilogy. And I must say, she's my daughter, but I love it. I hope you've heard some of it.
We're going to listen to it shortly, actually. We're going to listen to it. But just before that, there was a memorial to mark the centenary at the weekend. Were you involved in that at all?
I have talked to the verger about it. I wished I could have attended. He actually heard the last interview we did and contacted me. But sadly, I couldn't get over there, partly because of all the COVID stuff going on too.
All right. Well, we're going to listen to the book, or the audio, a little section of it, read by your daughter, Lauren. But if people want to get hold of it, how do they go about that?
If they want to, look at the book, you can go to Amazon. You can look at the books there. And you could go to my website, which is daviddennington.com. And that tells you quite a bit about it. The audio I'm going to post probably on Amazon just for the first chapter as a sample, and I'll post it to my website also.
All right then. Listen, it's been a joy talking to you. We're going to listen to that clip now, and thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. I love your accent too, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I love yours. You don't have an American accent at all.
Well, I was born in Durham.
There you go. I distinctly thought that there isn't really much of an American. A lot of people think I'm American actually rather than Irish for some weird reason. David, thank you so much for talking to us there, author David Dennington. Let's have a listen then. This is a clip from his audiobook.
Walls and ceiling. The coxswains clung to their wheels, but the Commodore remained cool. Suddenly, a deep, vibrating boom reverberated throughout the ship, like the snapping of a great steel string on a giant bass instrument. Every man felt the awful jolt through their feet and hands. "What the hell is that?" the American captain shouted. The rudder coxswain spun his wheel without resistance, shrieking in panic, his face ashen. "Rudder's gone, sir!" The ship was now in mortal danger. Terror showed in every face, including the Commodore's. "Rudder cables parted!" he shouted. "Cut power to all engines!" The American captain turned and screamed at Lou. "Remington, look to your crew!" "Aye, aye, sir," Lou replied over his shoulder as he and Potter raced up the stairs. When they reached the catwalk above the control car, crewmen clamoured for answers. "What's happened, sir?" Josh yelled. "We've lost the rudders. Get your parachutes on. All of you." On the pier, Charlotte and the children beside her gazed up at the airship, mesmerised. But then, almost in slow motion, a crease formed in its side, aft of the midsection, behind the control car. With a deep, sickening feeling in the pit of her stomach, Charlotte realised she was about to witness something terrible.
There you go, David Dennington's daughter Lauren there narrating a little piece of his book, which has been turned into an audiobook. And if you want to get hold of them, he's published an entire series called the FIRSHIPMEN Trilogy. And as he said, you can find it on his website or you can go to Amazon. And it marks 100 years today since the whole airship disaster, which killed, of course, 44 of the ship's crew. So if you want to find out more about that, well, just look up his website. I enjoyed that, actually. It's an awful disaster. But I do like the fact that he's written the books and his daughter has narrated it.